A single leaked report shatters the trust between Washington and Berlin. In hours, a political dispute becomes a military crisis. Warships shadow each other, jets scramble, and NATO's unity starts to crack. Two allies, once inseparable, now stand one mistake away from open conflict. The crisis does not begin with missiles, jets, or a hostile move on any border. It begins with a file, just 63 pages long, quietly leaked to the press by an unknown source inside the European Commission. The document outlines something sensitive. Germany, it claims, is considering a secret strategic autonomy framework, a plan to reduce dependence on the United States for intelligence, energy, and missile defense. But the most explosive detail is buried deep inside. Germany is allegedly negotiating a parallel security channel with China. The report uses cautious language, but Washington reads it differently. To U.S. intelligence officials, it signals one thing: Germany is trying to create an alternate power center, something that threatens America's long-standing role as NATO's anchor. Within hours of the leak, the White House Situation Room lights up. The U.S. National Security Advisor demands answers. Is Germany breaking away? Is Europe drifting from NATO? Is Beijing trying to wedge itself inside the Western alliance? Berlin, meanwhile, is blindsided. German intelligence chiefs push back hard, labeling the report political sabotage. Chancellery officials insist it's nothing but policy debate, internal discussions blown out of proportion. But Washington isn't convinced. The era of trust, already eroded since the NSA spying revelations and Nord Stream arguments, feels non-existent now. By evening, the story ignites global headlines. Anchors speak with a sense of awe and concern. Is NATO facing its biggest crisis since its founding? Inside Brussels, panic spreads faster than the leak itself. Diplomats scramble to coordinate a joint statement, but Germany refuses to sign anything drafted by the U.S. America refuses to soften any language drafted by Europe. France tries to mediate, but ends up frustrating both sides. The UK stays unusually quiet, calculating its own strategic advantages. By midnight, social media erupts with speculation. Is NATO collapsing? Are U.S. troops about to be expelled from Germany? Is Germany flipping toward China? In Washington, military planners begin preparing contingency folders, routine but symbolically dangerous. They model scenarios where Ramstein Air Base, the largest U.S. installation outside the United States, becomes restricted. They consider how troop rotations might shift eastward toward Poland. They even simulate what a reduced U.S. presence in Europe would mean for deterrence against Russia. Berlin interprets all this as escalation. German defense officials accuse the U.S. of overreacting and acting like an occupying force. The tone hardens. Voices that once whispered skepticism about America's dominance now talk loudly in Parliament. And then the spark comes. A U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft enters a German-claimed restricted air corridor over the Baltic Sea. Partly a misunderstanding, partly a result of shifting intelligence priorities. Germany responds within minutes. 2 Eurofighter Typhoons scramble to intercept. The radios crackle with tension. Distances close too fast. One wrong turn, and the collision risk becomes real. The footage leaks before the de-escalation does. A Typhoon banking just 50 meters from the U.S. aircraft. This time, the world doesn't ask questions, it panics. Washington accuses Germany of endangering American servicemen. Germany accuses Washington of violating German airspace. The NATO command center goes into emergency mode. For the first time since 1949, two NATO allies are on the brink of a military confrontation with each other. A crisis hotline opens between the Pentagon and Berlin, but calls feel mechanical, cold, and rehearsed. There is no trust left, only suspicion holding a knife under the table. Meanwhile, Moscow watches quietly. Beijing smiles privately. Paris starts calculating how to position itself. Warsaw feels vindicated, having long warned that Germany was becoming unreliable. By dawn, one message becomes clear. This is no longer about the leak. This is about who controls the future of the Western world. And both Washington and Berlin believe the other has crossed a line that can't be uncrossed.
What follows in the next 48 hours is a chain reaction, fast, loud, and dangerously predictable for anyone who has studied alliance breakdowns. The United States freezes several intelligence-sharing channels with Germany pending investigation. Berlin interprets this as hostile and retaliates by restricting certain American reconnaissance flights originating from Ramstein. Suddenly, coordination that once took minutes now takes hours or doesn't happen at all. In the Baltic Sea, the tension becomes physical. A U.S. Navy destroyer, USS Paul Ignatius, operating near the German maritime zone, detects a German Brandenburg-class frigate shadowing it at unusually close distance. Naval shadowing between allies isn't new, but this time the mood is electric, the space too tight, the intentions unclear. American commanders assume Germany is signaling strength. German commanders assume the U.S. is testing resolve. Neither side wants to blink. Meanwhile, the German press begins framing the crisis as American pressure tactics, pushing back against U.S. dominance in Europe. American media responds by portraying Germany as drifting into China's orbit, a betrayal in slow motion. Every article fuels anger. Every headline becomes a weapon. Back in Berlin, emergency cabinet meetings run deep into the night. Germany activates elements of its Rapid Forces Division, placing them on standby. They claim it's precautionary. The U.S. sees it as provocative. In Washington, the Pentagon quietly moves a squadron of F-35s to enhanced readiness, repositioning them closer to German air boundaries. Again, just precautionary. But Germany sees a threat. This mutual paranoia is how wars begin. Cyber operations escalate next, not officially claimed, but unmistakably targeted. A coordinated cyber attack hits power systems around Ramstein Air Base, causing outages in surrounding towns. Washington suspects German-origin malware, not necessarily government-sanctioned, but tolerated. Berlin denies everything and accuses U.S. cyber teams of probing the Bundestag's network the same night. The digital battlefield becomes the first real exchange of blows. NATO headquarters in Brussels enters full crisis management posture, calling for calm. But calming two giants in an ego war is impossible. The European Union tries to broker a meeting, but the U.S. refuses to attend unless Germany makes a public admission of wrongdoing. Germany refuses unless the U.S. retracts its accusations. Diplomacy collapses before it even begins. In the Baltic skies, the situation becomes even more fragile. German Eurofighters and US F-35 start seeing each other more often, too often. Dogfight-style maneuvers occur, not because anyone intends to fire, but because both sides feel the need to show presence. It's an ancient pattern. When trust disappears, proximity becomes dangerous. On day 3, a German radar operator misinterprets a U.S. electronic warfare signature as a spoofing attempt. For a moment, German command considers locking on with fire control radar. They don't. But the fact they almost did sends shockwaves through NATO. A confidential report is circulated in Brussels. Alliance integrity compromised. Risk of accidental escalation high. Washington reads it as justification to press harder. Berlin reads it as proof the U.S. wants domination, not partnership. Meanwhile, Poland begins quietly mobilizing certain units, preparing for any instability. France deploys reconnaissance drones to monitor Allied movements. Italy calls for unity but refuses to take sides. Spain stays silent. The cracks widen. In Moscow, Russian analysts publish their own interpretation. The Western alliance is collapsing. A divided NATO is an opportunity. In Beijing, diplomatic channels celebrate privately. A divided West gives China more leverage everywhere. trade, military deals, multilateral institutions. The confrontation between the United States and Germany is no longer bilateral. It is reshaping global power. And the next flashpoint is just hours away because someone, still unknown, leaks a secret Pentagon memo titled Contingency Planning, Restricted Operations Against Hostile NATO Member, Germany. That memo was real. The planning is real. The threat is real. And Germany panics. The confrontation is entering its next phase.
Berlin reacts instantly to the leaked Pentagon memo. Even though the document is labeled contingency only, the idea that Washington is modeling hostile operations against Germany crosses a psychological red line. German leadership calls it unthinkable, dangerous, and proof that the United States is preparing coercive pressure, not partnership. In response, Germany orders its military to initiate Operation Eigenständigkeit, a defensive readiness posture that increases surveillance of all foreign military activity on and around German territory, especially American. The U.S. interprets this as militarization. The Pentagon releases a statement reaffirming its commitment to NATO, but pointedly avoids mentioning Germany by name. Tension becomes suffocating. Then comes the incident that nearly flips confrontation into conflict. A U.S. military convoy transporting electronic warfare equipment from Ramstein to Poland stops at a checkpoint after German federal police demand inspection. American soldiers refuse. German officers insist. Dozens of German protesters gather, live streaming the scene. For 40 minutes, the convoy is stranded. Then a German armored vehicle quietly positions itself nearby for security. The U.S. responds by calling in a helicopter overwatch. Nothing happens, but the message is unmistakable. Trust is gone. Suspicion is the new rule. Berlin accuses the U.S. of moving undeclared systems through German soil. Washington accuses Germany of illegal interference in NATO operations. The EU attempts to intervene, but the EU's institutions lack military authority. Their words feel light. NATO's Secretary General tries to call an emergency summit. Berlin agrees. Washington refuses, demanding preconditions. Diplomacy is now dead. In the information sphere, both sides rally narratives. German talk shows depict the U.S. as a declining hegemon clinging to power. American analysts accuse Germany of strategic betrayal and alignment with China. Meanwhile, China quietly offers Germany a strategic dialogue, amplifying the perception that Berlin is drifting. But Germany isn't flipping sides, it's panicking, caught between its dependency on American security and its desire for autonomy. Still, perception becomes reality. In Washington, defense hawks argue that Germany is undermining the Western alliance. They urge reassigning U.S. assets to Poland and the Baltics. Berlin responds by drafting a law that would give the government power to review foreign military basing agreements. This alarms the U.S. deeply. Ramstein Air Base is not just an installation, it's the center of air operations in Europe and Africa. Losing it would be a strategic earthquake. So the U.S. begins quiet military repositioning. Transport aircraft begin shifting equipment east. Signals intelligence platforms adjust flight paths away from German airspace. Logistics hubs pivot toward bases in Poland, Belgium, and Italy. Berlin notices, interprets it as preparation for confrontation, and activates defensive ground-based air defense systems near major strategic nodes. Once again, neither side intends to escalate, but intent doesn't matter anymore. The breaking point arrives on a cold morning over the Baltic Sea. A U.S. RC-135 rivet joint electronic intelligence aircraft conducts a mission near German-defined zones. Germany dispatches 2 Eurofighters. The intercept starts routine. Then something goes wrong. A German jet misreads an American maneuver as crossing into a restricted pattern. The German jet banks sharply. The American pilot corrects. Distance closes too quickly. Collision risk spikes. For a full second, a U.S. electronic warfare officer thinks the German aircraft is locking on with fire control radar. He sends a coded alert back to base. Within minutes, U.S. ground stations increase readiness. German Air Command issues a parallel alert. For a terrifying moment, 2 NATO militaries prepare for the possibility of an aerial engagement. But the German pilot pulls away at the last second, radioing a tense correction. No hostile intent. Miscalculation. Continuing escort. Crisis hotline calls begin immediately, but they sound robotic. Both sides speak the language of protocol, not trust. NATO breathes again, but the world now understands something grim. For the first time since NATO was created, two of its most powerful members nearly fired on each other in real time, and everyone knows this confrontation is no longer theoretical. It has momentum, it has anger, it has gravity, and gravity always pulls downward.
The near collision sends shockwaves through every capital in Europe. France calls it a turning point. Britain calls it dangerously avoidable. Poland calls it proof we need U.S. forces closer to us, not Germany. Russia calls it expected. China calls it a moment for Europe to choose real sovereignty. Berlin and Washington publicly downplay the incident, but internally, both sides initiate steps that worsen everything. Germany begins drafting a policy to regulate foreign intelligence operations on its soil. The United States reviews legal options for relocating portions of EUCOM out of Germany. Each step feels defensive to one side and offensive to the other. Then a new fire ignites. Hackers penetrate Germany's air command network, temporarily disrupting air traffic monitoring. Germany blames a, quote, foreign military-grade actor. American officials fear Germany is implying U.S. involvement. Berlin clarifies nothing. Washington interprets everything. The rumor mill runs wild. Was the U.S. sending a warning? Is Germany preparing to kick out American troops? Is this the moment NATO finally cracks? As public opinion polarizes, domestic politics become hostile fuel. German politicians campaign on ending American pressure. American commentators demand serious consequences for German disloyalty. European unity fractures between quiet fear and open resentment. In this toxic atmosphere, the next escalation feels inevitable. The U.S. deploys additional ISR drones over the Baltic to ensure situational awareness. Germany deploys more Eurofighters to protect national sovereignty. The proximity becomes ever more unsafe. Meanwhile, a quiet standoff shapes up on land. Germany increases security around its major military bases, especially those housing American assets. Some locations even begin enforcing new perimeter checks, which irritates American personnel. The U.S. increases protection around its convoys and installations, worried about sabotage or political flashpoints. Both sides act as though the other might cross a line, even though neither wants to. This is the anatomy of an alliance collapse. Not explosions, but erosion. Not decisions, but drift. Not enemies, but partners who stop believing in each other. NATO holds an emergency session, but it collapses into shouting and walkouts. The Secretary General bluntly warns, there is a real risk, non-zero, that an American and German unit could exchange fire in the coming days. That sentence leaks within hours. The world panics again. Financial markets wobble. Oil spikes. Russian and Chinese state media amplify the narrative that NATO can no longer be trusted with global security. Ironically, Moscow and Beijing do nothing militarily because they don't need to. The West is doing their work for them. 2 days later, a final shock hits. A German naval drone system detects what it believes is an unauthorized signal intrusion near a patrol zone in the Baltic. Germany assumes it's an American probe. The U.S. assumes Germany is accusing them again. Berlin deploys a fast attack craft to investigate. Washington sends a P-8A to overwatch. A miscommunication, a sudden maneuver, and a German drone gets too close to the American aircraft. For the second time in the same week, collision risk rises to critical. The U.S. pilot sends a stern warning, back off, maintain distance. Germany responds, you are operating dangerously close to our defensive systems, adjust course immediately. Both sides refuse, both sides believe they are right, and for a single, horrifying moment, two NATO allies stand one mistake away from a war that neither wants, neither planned, but both have sleepwalked into. But the moment passes, barely. Both militaries disengage, and leaders finally understand the truth. They cannot keep going like this. The alliance is now one crisis away from total fracture. And if this collapse continues, the next mistake might not pass. It might ignite. The crisis enters its darkest phase. After the near naval incident, both Berlin and Washington realize the confrontation has spiraled beyond control, not because they seek conflict, but because they are trapped in a cycle of distrust neither side can break. In Washington, the president calls an urgent meeting with defense chiefs and the Secretary of State. The message is blunt. We are going to lose Germany if this continues, and with it, NATO's core, but military planners warn that reducing pressure now might look like retreat, emboldening Germany's push for autonomy. In Berlin, the chancellor faces a different dilemma. If we soften now, we look weak domestically and validate American dominance. Political pressure on both sides becomes a prison. Then the intelligence bombshell drops. A third-party signal intercept reveals that the cyber attack on Germany's air command likely originated from a Russia-linked group, not the US. That should relieve tensions, but it doesn't. Instead, it makes things worse. Washington accuses Germany of falsely implying the US was responsible. Berlin accuses Washington of using the revelation to shift blame back onto Germany for the crisis itself. NATO's internal report concludes the obvious. Escalation has been driven by mutual misinterpretations and the collapse of trust. But the report also issues a warning. Another intercept incident is likely within days and may not de-escalate in time. The report leaks. Everything leaks these days. The world now knows how close the US and Germany have come to open conflict. Russia mobilizes additional units near Kaliningrad, not to intervene, but to exploit distraction. China intensifies diplomatic outreach to Berlin. Iran issues statements calling NATO fractured and obsolete. For the first time in decades, the United States and Germany realize their feud is destabilizing not just Europe, but the entire global order. And then, something unexpected happens. In a closed-door briefing, a NATO crisis analyst presents a historical comparison. All major wars between great powers in the last 150 years began not with a decisive act of aggression, but with alliance miscalculation. World War I, the Italian invasion of Greece, the Falklands, the India-China border conflict, even the US-Iraq escalation of the 1990s and 2000s, all share the same DNA: misread intentions, political ego, broken communication, assumptions replacing clarity. The analyst warns, if this continues, the next incident will not be a near miss. It will be a shot. That message hits both Washington and Berlin harder than any threat. For the first time in the confrontation, both sides feel fear, not of each other, but of the consequences. A phone call is arranged, not a diplomatic one, but a military-to-military line between the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the German Inspector General. The conversation lasts 52 minutes. Most of it is tense silence, but by the end, something cracks. Not trust, but pride. Both military chiefs agreed to establish a direct deconfliction channel, something used in Syria and the South China Sea, but never before between NATO allies. It's humiliating, it's unprecedented, but it's necessary. And for the first time in weeks, the escalation line finally stops rising. The confrontation doesn't vanish, but it stabilizes. The skies calm, the Baltic seas quiet down, the cyber attacks halt, the media frenzy slows. Berlin and Washington are still wounded, suspicious and angry, but they have stepped back from the brink, and the world exhales. But one haunting question remains. If a single leaked document could push the US and Germany this close to war, what happens next time?
The collapse of trust between the United States and Germany never erupts into full-scale conflict, not because diplomacy triumphs, and not because either side realizes they were wrong, but because the consequences of escalation finally outweigh pride, politics, and pressure. The crisis exposes something deeper than a leak, or a near collision, or a cyber attack. It exposes how fragile alliances can become when trust disappears, how quickly partners can turn into rivals when miscommunication spreads, and how easily the world can slide toward conflict without a single shot being fired. Germany walks away shaken. The United States walks away frustrated. Europe walks away divided. And NATO walks away damaged. But the world also learns a harsh lesson. Even the strongest alliances can break. And when they crack, the danger isn't just a war between nations. It's the vacuum that forms when old structures fall apart. If this scenario ever becomes reality, the consequences would ripple far beyond Berlin and Washington. Russia, China, Iran, and countless regional powers would see opportunity. Global markets would tremble. Security doctrines would shift. And the world would enter a new age, not defined by unity, but by fragmentation. So, the question remains, if trust collapses again, and next time the near miss becomes a hit, who will stop the world's most powerful allies from becoming adversaries?